It's story time. 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 All right, I am back for episode 16. It's been a while since I got back to doing this series, the Journey Through PEI. But I finally found an hour to set aside to just talk about this next piece. I really want to finally get to talking about the Peillustrations because that's currently where my more mature state of mind is at. A lot of what I'm talking about here, regardless of technique, the advanced technique, I felt like all of this was a prerequisite to the more mature thought process I have now, regardless of the more childish type approach or cartoon-esque type approach to my technique. I have finally found where I can blossom into a mature version of myself. All of these things that I'm talking about in this iconography series are very important for my foundation and for my to legitimize my choice making, that I can do all of this, but I choose to do that. But it's all setting up for the Peillustration. So I really want to keep this ball rolling. However long it takes, I'm going to stick to it. So before I start talking about this piece before us, which is titled Metamorph is Us, a play on metamorphosis, I'm going to do my randomly generated question segment, followed by a punctuating, if that's a word, art pun. I'm going to stop the art puns at my final iconography and find a new segment to transition more casually into talking about these very elaborate works. So the random question I got today is, do you believe there is only one other person in the world for you, or many? So the way this series started, I introduced a very important relationship as part of the catalytic experience that led me to dive deep into myself, to observe myself internally and understand why I was expressing myself externally as I was. For the longest time, I thought that relationship was the one and only, because it had such a large impact, and that I had thrown away my one chance to, for lack of a better word or words, find my one, my twin flame, my soulmate, my perfect lover. But as the series went on and I continued to find new relationships, regardless of duration, I was able to taper off from the idea that she was the only one, but more invite the idea of every person, regardless of gender, regardless of levels of intimacy, is the one that you need in that moment, and that everyone around you collaborates in a reciprocal fashion to help each other grow into their best versions. And some have larger impacts than others, but everyone is just as important as the other, because a series of people you meet might be exactly the correlating series of experiences you needed to make perfect sense of a longer lasting relationship, regardless of intimacy. Like, that long-lasting relationship you might have not gotten as much out of it as you would have if you did not participate in all of these microcosmic relationships with people, again, regardless of intimacy. So as time went on, I really let go of the idea that there is only one person for you. You have a soulmate. Every person around you has the potential to have that impact, depending on your perspective, your openness to invite their influence. It's a cliche, but it's all star stuff. If you're inviting the light, it will enter. Will enter your space and cast a new view on yourself. It's all about personal growth and your own impact on others' personal growth, and that reciprocal relationship that you have with your community. Yeah, I'm glad I can keep that kind of concise. It's something that you can really talk on and on and on about. That idea of soulmate, one over the rest. So let's put a period on that with a little art joke. What did the artist draw before he went to bed? The curtains. Boom. I just like that joke because I kind of started this series with fabric, which is what curtains are made out of, and I drew curtains or fabric as the thing that was like, instead of going to bed, I woke up after drawing the curtains. There's a little irony there. But okay, let's proceed with the important parts of this episode. The metamorph is us. This piece was extensive. People always ask me when I show anyone this. I rarely show people this anymore. It's kind of, it has a diary type place in my life these days, based on how I have processed it over time. So it's not something I bring up in conversation, but anytime I have shown people this, people ask, the first question is, how long did that take? If I'm not mistaken, this took roughly a month and a half to 8 weeks. At this time of my life, I was very obsessed with drawing in this style, to the point where I felt like if I didn't draw every day, I was going to lose touch, or I wasn't going to maintain a consistent style, that I was just going to forget how to draw, simply put. So I drew every single day in that 2-month-ish period to pull this off. And it can range from 4 to 8 hours of my day, depending on what I had to do that day, who needed me, what I needed, how much I ate that day, how much I slept that night, school, work, blah, blah, blah. But anytime I got a chance to draw, I did draw. And if I didn't draw, I was freaking out inside. And if I'm freaking out inside, I had a tendency to share that energy with others. So if I didn't draw, I always had, or usually had, a cloud over my head. But when I did draw, those clouds would clear and I would be the brightest version of myself, almost like what this character appears to be. Like, just open to everything. I got what I needed. Now I am so inviting and just happy and satisfied. But it's important to make the correlation between the last piece and this piece. Although this series isn't necessarily chronologically meant to be perceived exactly in a chronological order, like it's not necessarily a story being told, but an expression of the moments I was in my own story in life. I'm not making connections like I am now in the Peillustration series, where it has a imaginative story. Each one of these pieces is mostly a reflection of how I felt in a period of my life when I was continuing to dive deep into self-reflection. And if there are correlations, it's through a transformative type connection, not something that I was thinking about at the time as something connected, but that if there is a connection, it's because it was a connection through my own personal growth as a person. I wasn't really looking at my previous pieces when I made this like I do with the Peillustrations that I do now. But now, as I look back, I can't help but notice the correlations between the last piece and the piece I'm talking about at any point in the now during these episodes. So the last piece was a higher self, this battle that I was having between the id, the ego, the superego, and an even higher self above that verbal understanding of myself, this ephemeral state of mind that overlooks the entire breakdown of all the facets of yourself, a higher self. But in that battle, I was trying to tame and understand it through another. I was trying to tame that egoic, powerful, potent part of myself that made me pursue this style, made me fascinated with certain specifics in my life, made me interact with the people that I was interacting with, made me involved with the culture I cultivated, made me think about my life in a certain way. The ego that has a lot of stigma, that can drive a lot of negative influence on your life choices, through the inability to tame that part of yourself, not thinking enough about it, not catering to its needs, but letting it just run wild in your life and not understanding the negative impacts it could have when not leashed in some way. It's just in a totally unleashed state of being. So here I was hoping to, or I felt at the time, whether it lasted, I felt at the time that I had a better grip on my personality, the things that I found important, all the things that drove me to act the way I did. I felt like I was seeing it all on one plane through the last piece. I was able to identify most of the major catalysts of my actions, or major like initial triggers to the catalysts, like the roots of all the things that lead me to act the way that I do. I was able to identify those as realities to observe and reverse engineer to the point where I felt like I was having a better relationship with the friends. I was able to identify those around me that had a negative impact on my perceptions of my life and what drove me to act the way I did. I was able to separate the pros and cons of my decision-making chemistry, and find a part of myself, a higher self, that could act in a more balanced way in order to find a portal of myself to travel through with said control or taming, to leave certain things behind on the other side of that portal and enter a new space through that portal where I can act more conscious of my influence, my impact on others, and my chronic impact on my own health, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And through that transformation, that dragon that was either in a yin, peaceful, or let's say toxic, feminine energy where I was completely docile but not acting on anything because I was trying to be completely subdued, or the yang egoic version of myself that just acted on impulse and compulsions and couldn't perceive a moment of rest. I was just like on two. I was constantly before in a state of extremes. It was either this or that. The irony, or the funny thing about that this or that concept is, a lot of people, when you live in that way where it's either this or that, they call you you're being black or white. Like, why you live in a black and white world? Like, you're in between two extremes where it's all or nothing, and that's kind of what it was. Like, it's yin or yang. It's not a balance of the two where you find the silver lining that is, that curve in between the yin yang. You're not finding that balance. You're just jumping from one side of the portal to the other. So at this point in my life, I felt through my interactions with my life, by observing the impact and my like meditating and reflecting at the end of the day how things went, I was able to observe this silver line that I was balancing myself on, to the best of my ability at the time, but it was the best that I had ever accessed. And that dragon, instead of it being this or that, it was in between. It was, because it was in between, it could observe this and that equally. It was like, instead of being on one side or the other side of this portal that I mentioned, it was the portal. It was this in between space to be, where it didn't have to be this or that. It could just be comfortably and confidently, and totally aware of all of its facets of itself, to act not necessarily naturally, but with more ease, but not like unconscious, not like loose, but relaxed because I'm able to acknowledge who I am as the best version of who I am that leads to the best versions of who I am. And because of that acknowledgement that took a lot of hard work, I was able to ride that out with a little bit more ease without feeling like I had to fall on this or that side to lean on it. Where, let's say I'm doing too much impulsively, so now I'm like, oh, I need to relax completely to counterbalance that. Or I'm way too relaxed, I'm not doing enough, and then I feel like I need to act to compensate for how little I was doing. It was a state of I'm doing both. Like, I'm finding a practice where I'm pulling it all off in a sequence of almost like I found like my melody of expression, where I wasn't living in a low frequency, I wasn't living in a high frequency. I found this melody that was true to my rhythm. I found a rhythm of this and that had this sequence that I could see it all at once as this flow state. And I think that's why here we have this dragon, that ego, in this flow state, this balanced flow state, where it's like two infinities crossing as one linear line, and it's balanced, so it's suggestive of like this balance of the two sides of the self, this yin yang. Like it's got one side that's curving this way, and then it's got the bottom and the tail that's curving that way. It's like oriented in this balanced flow state. Like, I wanted the dragon, that ego that I was having so much trouble taming or acknowledging or respecting or anything it needed. I was able to represent it in a way that reflected on how I felt. And I think that's what my art always is regardless of what I'm aware of, my art tends to be an accurate representation of how I'm feeling. And if my art doesn't appear a certain way, then clearly I'm not feeling that way. Like, my art is my most surface level representation of the deeper underlying experience. It's like if you're eating poorly, your skin's going to start getting really oily or acne ridden, or if you're not able to handle the external influences and your internal chemistry, your outward appearance is going to react. And this is like my skin, my epidermis, the outward appearance that is reacting to this internal experience. And understanding that was really important, because as you saw in the last piece, A Higher Self, it was very chaotic. I was going through so much in order to access these parts of myself, these understandings that experience was reflected on, like, my outward appearance. My art showed that chaos. There was no balance. There was just fight. There was just like so much going on in one space simultaneously. But finally, once I had access to this state of mind, this awareness, I was able to see through the eyes of the higher self that I was trying to access through that chaos. All of that found this uniform representation that has balance and flow. And in that flow, you can see, like, before the ego didn't know its purpose. Its hands were just, maybe not just, but they were definitely impulsive. Like, what they held was very primal. There was no understanding of what it should do. It was either gripping on nothing but a simple concept, or gripping on everything, time and space. But here, what it is grasping onto through its posture is this portal, this edge of a portal, which is symbolic for it accessing a new space, a new mental space. Like, the ego isn't the mental space, but is the means of accessing a place within yourself. Like, a lot of people there's that cliche of, like, don't identify with your ego. The ego is not you, but the ego is a mechanism that can open up the opportunity to be yourself, but don't see it as you. Like you're using a hammer to hammer a nail, but that hammer isn't you. It's an opportunity to see how you hold something and what you do with that, but you aren't the hammer. The hammer is just the conduit to express you as the artist, as the creator, as the higher self. The ego is the tool. It is not you. A lot of people can see themselves as that tool, but that makes you a tool. And if I were to identify myself as this dragon, which I did many times, I found myself being aggressive or too ambitious, just hyperactive, exactly as the ego would want to be. It's a high energy tool. It's this conduit for self-expression, which is infinite, but it's too much to be. You can't be that. You shouldn't be that, but you can also be so much more without being as much. This oxymoronic experience where, like, you are so much more than what you see in this tool that is this access point to yourself. But you're not as concrete. You're more infinite in a more ephemeral way. You're not specifically this. If you're specifically this, you're like trying to be too much. And if you're not that, then you hate yourself for it. But because you have access to all this, but you yourself can change at any given moment with ease, then you're not stuck to being any one self. You are infinite. You are anything. You are anything you set your mind to. But you with that awareness, you have access to these complicated tools of consciousness that is intimidating, that is ambitious, but it's up to you to get a grip on any part of that. You don't have to be all of that, but you can be all of that depending on your ability to harness it. But through that harnessing of the tool that is the ego, you can access a higher self that can function accordingly. And that's what we see here. But before I dive into this metamorph is us, or metamorphosis here, I kind of want to explore this journey that is the dragon, because there's some important introductions. Like, at this time was like prior, I was letting go of like intimately letting go of a previous relationship that had number correlations. And as I said before, it's not a relationship with others that you're necessarily having, but you have a relationship with yourself through the intimacy of others and vice versa. And I had these correlating numbers in association with these deeper connections with other people. And before the dragon had, I think it was in its eyes, it had 818, which was a very important number for me in a prior relationship. It was this reflection of infinity, the infinity with a mirror and infinity on the other side of that, like two parts of infinity were seeing each other through love. But as I was letting go of that as my main form of insight, which is why the dragon, the ego, had the eyes with 818, I was able to use a more sensitive sense. Like they say that the sense of smell is more correlating, or it has a stronger correlation to memory, and memory is the accumulation of essence that leads you to perceive your life in a certain way. The ego is compiled out of all of those memories, which is why it's important that I explore these textures and things that are hidden within them, because these are all the memories that I was compiling as I live my life in hopes to access a grip on taming this egoic tool in order to be my more honed in self. But underneath the nose, that symbol for this memory accumulation ability, I have the numbers 1, 3, and 7 reflected like the 818. So there's still an awareness of the 818, but the numbers 1, 3, and 7 are reflecting across from each other, the reverse 7, 3, 1. So the 1 through 7 were these prime numbers that kept appearing in these synchronistic moments in my life where I was accessing this awareness of my infinity. Like I was finding these concrete coordinate points of infinity that amounted to certain like save points in my life. These cornerstone memories, 1 through 7, would appear. So instead of 8 being this general state of infinity, I was able to find these moments in my life through synchronistic appearances of 1 through 7 that led me to understand these parts of myself that were important to observe. I was able to understand why certain parts of myself were important to observe in order to attain a better grip on the tool that is the ego, that could lead me to act with less impulse and more understanding of how things will turn out for me internally and others externally. So it's such a small part, but it's the tip, it's the point of this journey. It's what leads to everything else, or the access to everything else. This awareness, this access to the awareness of everything else is at the tip of the nose of this dragon. And of course, all of this are the textures, these motif textures from the plant that were all these physical symbols for experience being processed, being observed, appreciated, or digested, appreciated, and then expressed thus after. That experience with this plant as a motif or as a physical thing was symbolically represented as the dragon, this experience, this life being lived, this life being smoked through in order to access the psychoactive influence of life. Like it's important that you don't forget in the series that the plant is more than the plant. It's a symbol for the relationship you have with how you process life as this substance worth ingesting and appreciating and building yourself from. So as we proceed, we have the spine, which is the tips of the J's, which are representative of honing in on specific practices, patterns of living, the backbone of your life, and all of these layers. I saw each of these like they were, because I was very into Chinese and Japanese scroll paintings that showed these storylines and important archetypal characters, but also political figures, and I just enjoyed that scroll type orientation where you just kind of glide across and see what's important at a major focal point. But here you'll be able to see that influence where I was hiding more and more memories, these people, and you'll see where my mouse is. These people having these memories. I don't know if you can really see it so well because of the graininess of the photo, but these are memories that were important where I had these moments where, let's say I saw a clock and it was 1 through 7, or I noticed the date, it was 13/7, or not 13/7, like like 13th day of the 7th month, like things like that, where I was noticing things in a memory, and then it would be like, I was like, in those moments, I was able to see outside of myself, like almost like sleep paralysis in life, where you're like, you get this bird's eye view. Another one right here, laying down in the hammock. Here, this dude crawling over to here, another one, another dude crawling. Another dude right here trying to get a grip. And some of these postures are symbolic. Like what they're doing suggests these efforts that I was having to access these things. Some of these bird's eye views of myself were symbolic. They were imaginative as a result of what I was experiencing in a real moment. If that makes sense. Another dude hiding over here. And again, a lot of these introductions of these figures in these tight spots surrounded by this texture that was very reminiscent of the periodolic effect that I got from drawing the t-shirts and seeing all of these sceneries that weren't necessarily there but could be perceived in this ambiguous texture. It's all relevant when I look at life, when I look at life's experience, the universe. It's all this nebula of ambiguous perspectives. Like everyone's living the same life but having different views of that life, and it's in an out of context view. It all looks random until you find these moments in life that are so clear and obvious, and it becomes these moments where it's like, okay, that's a person, but I almost see people scattered throughout this texture, but it's not as clear or some of them are more clear to you because it might be held in a posture that's relevant to your perspective of the ambiguity of your nature of life. But I liked introducing these scale relevant figures that made you see the potential of all these other things that could be perceived around you that may be ambiguous at any given point, but if you look closely enough, you might be able to identify part of yourself in that piece of the universe, piece of your life experience. See another two figures here being observed by this figure. But there's like random things, like where here it looks like a little dog with a larger humid head. I don't know. There's just random things like that, cloud watching. Like, regardless of this being what it is, I also wanted, out of context, these textures just to be enjoyed. Just to be like portals into infinity. And again, as mentioned before, this dragon, this balance of self, is not one balance of infinity, but a reciprocal balance of infinity, like a cross of infinity. Like you have one axis to infinity, but then you have a rotated axis to the same infinity, but you're experiencing your life through a crossover of two infinities. I guess that's also, I'm thinking now, but it's like an infinite balance state of the yin crossed with the infinite balance state of the yang as one quartet of infinity, and one could lead into the other. Like it's all hidden behind this access to the self. I may have just rambled on there, but I don't know. It made sense to me. Also, you'll notice that there's this kind of suggestion to the breasts that were referenced earlier on in the Where It All Stems piece, where the breasts were representative of these symbols for early consumption, the first things that we had access to for consumption purposes. And at the tip of this tail, you see a more suggestive representation of these patterns of consumption, and then that kind of extends into these plates of, in this case, it was like, I was referencing textures of shatter, of concentrate of the raw plant, that were these, that it was symbolic of your intent to get the most out of what you consume, taking a raw part of the world and concentrating it to its most useful properties or most appealing properties, the pure THC, which was what the shatter was, oil. Which also goes to like one of the first pieces where you have the oil rig at the top, and this oil rig is like a corporate symbol for the intent to extract the highest form of the raw matter. And this representation of these parts of the world that try to monetize on consumption. Just trying to see. Also, you see in this portal that they're pulling apart, you'll see callbacks to previous works, because in order to access this access point of understanding this transformation of being this higher version of yourself, I had to enter so many places within the same landscape that is your internal experience. So here you see the the shatter lake from the previous reflective piece in the pacifier, and then you see the higher self stone, but with the tiger, that super ego type representation of, the representation of the super ego, for lack of a better word. The tiger is kind of nestled into the stone where it was battling the dragon. Also, that hermit shack at the top of the mountain in those sativa mountains in the pacifier, but also the mine castle moated in this shatter lake, and then these mountains of it could be indica sativa, but just mountains of experience, and also these footsteps that you see where it looks like someone has been exploring this landscape, and that was me trying to arrive at certain perspectives of my life. I had to trek from one part of myself to the other within myself, and that's all like in this portal. But from this portal, you're able to access this experience, this transformation, this transformative experience. So we worked our way down through this cross infinity of a more tamed egoic tool, and then from the tip of the tail we hit this point where we'll now kind of work our way back up. It's kind of symbolic for like we got down to the depths of ourself, however dark that needs to be, but we get down symbolically down to the depths, and then from that deep place you can now rise up with more coherent thought about the purpose for your rise. So at that point, we have the tip of the tail and the smoke trailing off from the tip of the tail, kind of rising as smoke does, and entering the nose. Like at the beginning of this, you see the dragon's nose, the 1 through 7 being this source of this reflective journey, but now it's going to reflect and enter the nose of a new journey of the self, the real self, which I'm using a very self-aware friend of mine that I had at the time as a archetypal figure to represent this real journey of the real self that is in tune with all the tools that they have to access themselves. So it's entering his nose, and it's almost like this cartoony pie smell. You know, like you have the pie on the windowsill, and then the characters like floating through the wisp of the smell, like emitting from the pie, and they float towards the source of such a sweet smell. And that sweet smell here is self-awareness. But here he's aware, but it's part of this. He's aware of this external, out of portal influencer, but he's through that awareness focused on this part of the journey, which I'm going to use. And at the time in my relationship, we were growing milkweeds and tending to the monarch butterflies with our milkweeds, and watching the caterpillars eat the milkweed and then eventually become cocoons within the area, and then watch them hatch or not hatch or halfway hatch and become the butterflies that pollinated the area, and then so on and so forth. So this stage of development, self-development, is the caterpillar stage, where he's in this cavernous place where he can't quite see, they can't quite see their environment. They're really just caught up on what's inside themselves, and they're finding all of this material inside themselves represented in he's holding like a bag where he's observing his collection of buds, metaphors for life experience and memories. He's appreciating all of the milkweeds, metaphorically speaking, that he's consuming like a caterpillar would, without understanding why, but through the appreciation, the true and deep appreciation of these souvenirs of life, he's unknowingly setting the stage for the cocoon place where he will be able to take what he's found and transform it into a means of accessing a higher awareness of himself. So here he's just in this cavernous place, experiencing life, collecting memories, making sense of it, being grateful for it, and surrounding him unknowingly, he is like in this intent to cocoon himself. He's already building the cocoon, which is this like egg type shape, which is also framed by the edge contour of this tail. It like builds this egg. Like this whole journey down was also part of unknowingly building the cocoon type shape, and then it's interwoven or connected to the intention to encase yourself in this shell of self-awareness, this cocoon where you can melt into your new form, and surrounding this or embedded in the shell of this cocoon, you see all of these. At the time, I was getting very deeply involved with the glass artists around me, so I was observing the cocoons of their creative process. Also, it's worth mentioning this series was me eating the milkweed and unknowingly building the cocoon where I was already beginning to melt and transform and find my wings, where I can really express myself honestly, earnestly, and really tap into my passions with meaningful intentions. So when I was observing these reflective objects that were being molded through another community's like means of accessing the same thing, this creative space, this flow state, I was trying to tap into those cocoons and build my own cocoon with those as pieces of the puzzle that was filmed, like building the film that is the cocoon, the metaphorical cocoon. I was appreciating all of these other means of accessing yourself through the creative process, and my appreciation of other people's creative process led me to appreciate the means of my own creative process in an even more meaningful way, in a more aware way. So in that, I have all of the figures that initially were kind of lost in these memories, surrounded by the chaos of establishing a relationship with myself inside and out. They're now more clear, and they're interacting with these creative processes through art appreciation, and they're like playing with them like they're playgrounds. Like the cocoon should be this playful state, where you're seeing it for what it is, and you're swinging around and climbing it and getting underneath and really having fun with this experience, not taking yourself so seriously, but being aware of the blessing that is all of this and taking advantage of it in a innocent way, which is what the word play kind of suggests. Oh, there's also a little guy here rolling up a J. I just find that important. But also you see, yes, there's all these figures and these other means of representing the creative process. You got one guy, he's like getting crushed by this. He's like falling in between. Some things are intimidating. But here we have this pencil, this collection of pencils, which was just a little hint to myself, like to remember that my relationship with my pencils is like another person around me's relationship with their glass. That my pencils were my means of building my vessel for self-reflection, life appreciation, and I kind of wanted it to blend with all these other like microcosms. They almost look like it's like this is like one nebula or galaxy or universe filled with these galaxies, and in these galaxies whole lifestyles are built, and some of them are large, some of them are small, some of them are piles of pencils, and within are these modes of gravity that interact with these metaphorical galaxies the way gravity does, where things spiral around and play with matter. Threw my little kitty in there also. It's a nice little cameo. Because again, remember my cat thinking that I saw my cat in a t-shirt on the floor was a huge catalyst for me becoming more playful. Initially in a serious manner, but starting there, but becoming more playful with this idea of drawing things in hopes to find things that were never meant to be there in this psychedelic, playful way. That little cameo is a big part. And it's also a big part of the cocooning process that I didn't even know I was involved in until I got to this point where I can kind of step away from it and see myself from the outside and be like, oh wow, this is something that's been happening. And that the tip of the cocoon, like I noticed that if the cocoon wasn't hanging in a certain way and it didn't have that clean connection with its space, the cocoon could not build a healthy butterfly. So that little connecting point that held the cocoon in what was that word for floating, a state of floating, like if there wasn't a healthy connection, what was happening within that cocoon was not going to lead to a healthy butterfly. The butterfly needed to be held in suspension, so that it could with ease erupt and hang and open its wings slowly, and not be crushed by the floor it may have fallen on. So that this figure right here is an important connecting piece mechanism of the cocoon symbol. And in that we see that this figure, who was only appreciating it and didn't really understand what to do with all the things he found, was able to take a piece of this appreciation that is the shell of this cocoon and interact with it and take a real meaningful hit from themselves. Like they were able to access, like they found a vessel within themselves, which I use here, like it's the creative process that is that vessel, and in that creative process they were able to access this concrete part of themselves where they could find the tools. Like the tool that he's holding is like the ego, and with that ego he's able to dip important part of appreciation and tap it into this hot banger of self-awareness, and in that he can take a drag of that whole life experience and thus get an impact, a higher no pun intended, but a higher state of mind where they can see and appreciate all of that effort and its outcome. And from that, from this whole experience, they seamlessly emerge with this gaze to a higher place, to a place above all of this. Like this is all primal. But through this process of the creative process, whatever medium that is you, they were able to access this lighter state of being where they're not weighed down, and they could truly express themselves and fly. As cliche as that sounds, like they found their wings and they can fly and soar above all of this. And in the wings, I wanted to use these hands, which initially, like when we were looking at the struggle, the hands were a symbol of the chaotic reach towards the future. But here the hands are perfectly balanced, and each hand on either wing is a perfect symmetrical representation of the other side. Like, it was extremely difficult technique-wise and in life to find this balance where if I did something on one level, I needed to counterbalance it with another that it was aware of this other thing that I did. Like if I did, it was almost an extension of my OCD. Like if I did something with my left hand, I needed to now learn how to do it with my right hand. If I folded my laundry one way, or if I knocked my laundry or used my laundry, then I needed to now fold my laundry. Like, it's just this counterbalance act that I was totally aware of. Whether I knew how to flap my wings yet or not, that's another story, but I was able to build them through this process, this metamorphosis. And I say metamorphosis because it's a personal experience that I had in my own metamorphosis, but through that metamorphosis, I was able to look around me and see all the metamorphs that were happening, that we all are going through together. Like the grand metamorph is us. Like, we all work together to help build the space where we can eat the milkweed, find a healthy spot to establish this place where we can melt and transform, and then continue to pollinate the garden where we can proceed with this process of birth and rebirth and these metamorphoses. What is the plural of metamorphosis? Metamorphosi? Like, it's a group effort to make this happen. It's also why I used a friend as a representation of this personal experience I had with myself. I wanted to access another person's creative process. I wanted to reference it more so in order to understand my own process. Like, I wanted to know that it was happening all around me so that I knew that what was happening within me was normal. Or is to be expected, or is a shared experience. Also, I used a kind of abstracted representation of the flower of life to build the structure of these wings. The flower of life it suggests this underlying geometry to how things are arranged, and depending on how you interact with that geometry, you can blossom in this certain way. And here I denied certain petals and merged certain petals and created my own form of blossoming into who I was. And this was how my flower of life appears to be. It's not, I recognize that my mode of transformation isn't standard. It is kind of abstract. And I don't want to say unique because I think everyone's life is unique, but I do recognize that the way I represent my own transformation isn't typical, but it is sourced in the same structure that we all have access to, that this flower of life. Also, in these wings, I drew the drawing of the struggle, or not the struggle, it was a struggle, but a higher self. Like within these wings is almost like the way wings have not the translucent or opalescent shimmer. Like in that reflection of the wings, you see this reminiscence of a previous state of being. Like the wings are built out of the stuff that you melted into and built yourself from. Like that melting process of my own creative process in this case is the stuff that formed my wings. So I wanted to kind of tap into that. Also, you have these three dudes on each other's shoulders, which was a callback to the struggle where you had the me, myself, and I all leaning on each other in order to get this point. And you have the one guy that you see his head, and he has the higher view with the help of these other selves so that he can see this higher self. And that's why there's also an I right here, this a higher self observing this process. Like it's all embedded into these wings. Also, there's references to this cave, this cavernous space where a guy is crawling through this bottleneck in order to access this experience, and it's like a microcosm of this essence. Like all the symbols, I think, repeat in different forms in order to have all this multifaceted perspective of the same process, because it's important when you're doing any one thing to observe it from a million different angles, to see it in the round. Because if you were to look at a sphere, you wouldn't understand its depth if you only saw it from one angle. You need to walk around that sphere to understand the composition and volume of that shape. And in this case, that sphere is the self. So I may have rambled a little bit there. I just kind of wanted to share general thoughts, however much they made sense. That's it. I don't know what that is, but I hope some of it made sense to anyone listening, that they got any one piece of that rant, and it helped them see their own stage of development. Maybe you're a caterpillar in your life right now. Maybe you're in cocoon state. Maybe you're ready to fly. But I hope something here helped you see a little bit more clearly what stage of development you're in. But also understand that we're not exactly like butterflies. We don't have any one metamorphosis. We have rebirths. We find these catalysts that make us recognize ourselves as a growing organism that could be a caterpillar. Like, you could have been a butterfly in your previous life, but then you have something that triggers you and makes you recognize that you're not a butterfly anymore in this world. You are a caterpillar once again, and now you need to consume what's relevant and establish, with an awareness of your previous life, establish a relationship with that substance around you, build the cocoon, transform within, and then emerge uplifted with this passion as a result, and that you have many ego deaths and ego rebirths. And this was just me acknowledging that process that will happen over and over and over again, as many times as necessary in as many worlds as you live. But okay, I think that is enough of that. If you guys ever want to see these drawings up close in stillness, you can always check out my website. I believe I linked it in my description on all my videos. If you go into drawings and iconographies, you can look at these up close and get a more clear view of all the different details that I may have glanced over. But yeah, I look forward to talking about the next piece, because it's about to get super wild. And yeah, we have 2 more pieces to talk about before we can enter the world of Peillustrations, which will get even more playful. But until then, let's move on to the next Peibi Playhouse episode, where we can kind of playfully come down from this deep, dark, rambling state. And yeah, enjoy that episode. And until we meet again, have a great day, a great night, and a great time in general. Peace. Huh? Aw, man, again? DMP, it's another day with DMP. He's made out of clay. DMP, the Dutch Master Peibi and friends. DMP, take the chance and play with DMP. He's here to stay. DMP, the Dutch Master Peibi and friends. Alright, number 3, open your eyes. Oh, dude, Prism, you're a blessing. I can't believe you scooped Immortal Kombat. Prism, you know I've been trying to play this game for months now, and I just can't believe it's right here. I'm gonna be playing this all day and all night, Prism. Alright, number 3. You know this is a 2-player game. This isn't Time Crisis. So, you're gonna have to share Immortal Kombat with number 1 and number 7. Okay, number 3? Alright, Prism. I see you. I feel it. I'll share. But I'm about to tear him up. Fatality!